Welcome to this edition of FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars. Education and information for retailers and small businesses, sponsored by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and its Center for Tobacco Products. I'm David Racine. Thanks for joining us. Now, we've done webinars about the registration and product listing requirements in the past. You can find those on our website. But over the last several months, staff in the Office of Compliance and Enforcement have continued to enhance the electronic system used to submit tobacco registration and listing information. And this webinar is intended to share information about how these enhancements have been put into place to help streamline the process of submitting information to us. In this program, we'll also share some helpful tips on the registration and listing process in light of questions we've received from industry. And joining me today to talk about some of the new features of the tobacco registration and product listing system and to provide us with some of those helpful tips is Lillian Ortega, Deputy Director of the Division of Enforcement and Manufacturing here in the Office of Compliance and Enforcement. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Lillian, before we get started with all the what's new, isn't there an important deadline coming up that we wanted to remind our viewers about?
That's right. Back in May of 2017, FDA announced it was providing a 3-month extension of future compliance deadlines for requirements under the final deeming rule. As a result, if you're an entity engaged in the manufacture, preparation, compounding, or processing of tobacco products in the United States prior to August 8, 2016, and continuing operations after August 8, 2016, the new compliance date for establishment registration and product listing is September 30, 2017. And I just want to remind everyone that the requirement to submit registration and product listing information isn't just a one-time requirement. Firms must resubmit their establishment registration annually on or before December 31st of each year, in accordance with Section 905B of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, or FD&C Act. And certain changes in their product listing must be submitted biannually, once during June and once during December, in accordance with Section 905I of the FD&C Act. You could find more information about the types of changes that require product listing updates in the November 1st, 2016 Registration and Product Listing webinar and the Registration and Listing Guidance. Both are available on our website.
So Lillian, I would imagine there are some manufacturers of the newly deemed tobacco products that have not yet registered their establishments or provided product listings. So I'm hoping that today's brief program will be helpful to them. And some of the tips may also be useful to those who have used the system before. So why don't we start with some of the tips for providing registration and product listing information, and then later on we'll talk about some of the enhancements we've added to the system.
All right. Let's first go over a few abbreviations and acronyms I'll be using today. TRLM is the Tobacco Registration and Listing Module of FURLS, which stands for FDA Unified Registration and Listing System. TRLM is the electronic submission system designed to streamline the data entry process for registration and product listing at CTP. An FEI number stands for FDA Establishment Identification Number and is a unique identifier assigned by the FDA to identify firms associated with FDA-regulated products. Now that we have gone over the acronyms, the first tip I'm going to share is about the required and optional fields in TRLM. While there are several fields on the forms in TRLM, not all of them are required. In addition to providing the required information, we'd like to encourage you to provide us with as much of the information requested in the optional fields as you're able. Why is that? Well, if a firm did not provide its contact information in its registration and product listing profile, then FDA would have no way to contact the firm if or when questions came up in the FDA review process. Also, by completing all the fields in TRLM, even if the field is optional, it could help speed up completion of the FDA review process and the time it takes to assign an FEI number to an establishment. Tip number 2 is about the establishment name and location. First, keep in mind that P.O. boxes are not an acceptable establishment location when submitting registration and listing information in TRLM. The address provided should be the physical location of the manufacturing site. Second, firms should use the legal name of their business, for example, as it is registered with the State Office of the Secretary of State, where their business is located, if required by that state, in the establishment name field in FURLS TRLM.
All right, let's talk about a couple of other scenarios. So let's say I'm no longer a manufacturer of a product and I want to delete that listing. How do I do that?
There is no feature in TRLM that would allow a user to delete tobacco product registration and listing information previously submitted. This information may not be deleted and must be maintained as part of the administrative record. However, users may inactivate tobacco products in TRLM that are no longer being marketed and distributed. If you take a look at the TRLM Help Guide, you can find step-by-step help instructions for the inactivation process. I've included a link to the guide on your screen.
Okay, I got another scenario. I want to be able to duplicate product listings that I have under one manufacturer to another. Now, does that ever happen, and can I do it?
To answer your question, yes, it does happen. For example, a tobacco brand owner might use multiple manufacturers or co-packers, or might anticipate changing manufacturers over time and would want to duplicate or move the product listings. So for my next tip, we recommend that if a firm thinks they might fall into either of these scenarios, the firm should maintain control of the account ID. That means that a firm could register on behalf of the manufacturer using the submitter type owner registering on behalf of operator. As long as both establishments are under the same account ID, you would be able to transfer product listings from one establishment to another. There is no feature in TRLM that would allow a user to transfer product listings from one account to another account.
Now, depending on the number of product listings that a firm needs to submit, I'd imagine that for some establishments, the process would take longer and maybe in some cases could take place over several days. So how does the system handle that type of submission?
We've created Excel spreadsheet templates to help the firms with the product listing submission process. The templates are available in each section of the system where spreadsheet uploads and downloads are allowed. Each column contains its own help feature to guide users through the process. Spreadsheets with up to 800 rows of products will be uploaded and instantly processed. Spreadsheets with more than 800 rows of products and up to 250,000 rows of products will be uploaded by the user, and the system will process the spreadsheet offline. Users will receive a notification email once the system processing of the spreadsheet is completed with instructions to proceed. As a tip, I'd like to stress the importance of verifying that you have the most up-to-date spreadsheet, which may be downloaded after you successfully log into the TRLM system. Previous versions of the downloadable spreadsheets cannot be successfully uploaded into the system and will result in receiving an error message. Also, modifications to the template spreadsheets will result in an error and will prevent spreadsheets from being successfully uploaded to the system. For example, removing headers or deleting any of the columns will result in an error message. Also, all columns with an asterisk are required fields that must be completed in the spreadsheet template before uploading it to the FURLS TRLM system.
So Lillian, earlier you reminded us that firms must update their registration annually, and certain product listing changes must be submitted to FDA biannually in accordance with the Act. So do you have any tips about that process?
Yes. As a reminder, resubmitting annual registration and updating product listings are two separate processes. We recommend that when a firm resubmits its annual registration, it should update the establishment information and save all the changes first to complete that process. If at that time the firm is required to update their product listings in accordance with Section 905I3, then the firm should complete the process to update the product listing and save those changes accordingly.
Is tobacco product listing just another name for ingredient listing?
No. Those are two separate requirements under the law and are submitted using two different electronic systems. As previously mentioned, the tobacco registration and product listing information can be submitted electronically using the TRLM module of FURLS. Ingredient listing requirements, which are outside the scope of this webinar, are submitted as an e-submitter package through CTP portal. For tobacco products that are imported, the required ingredient information is to be submitted by either the foreign manufacturer or the importer of the product. Please visit our website for more information about the ingredient listing submission requirements.
I understand you're getting lots of questions about registration and listing from foreign manufacturers, from importers, and cigar retailers. So what kinds of tips do we have for these groups?
First, regarding foreign manufacturers, foreign establishments within any foreign country engage in the manufacture, preparation, compounding, or processing of tobacco products are not required to register and provide product listings until FDA issues regulations establishing such requirements in accordance with Section 905H of the FD&C Act. That means foreign manufacturers are not currently required to register and submit product listings, provided they do not own or operate a domestic establishment engaged in the manufacture, preparation, compounding, or processing of tobacco products. Second, importers, including cigar importers, are not required to register their establishments and provide product listings or obtain an FEI number unless they're performing manufacturing activities. In a previous webinar, I went over those activities, but let me mention them again here. Importers who do not own or operate a domestic establishment engaged in the manufacture, preparation, compounding, or processing of a tobacco product are not required to register their establishment or provide product listings. So if you are an importer who solely stores the tobacco product and sells to retailers in the U.S., you do not need to register and provide product listings to FDA. But if you're an importer who relabels or repackages an imported tobacco product with your own label or packaging, then you need to register and list with FDA. Finally, FDA defines someone to be a retailer if they sell tobacco products to an individual for personal consumption. Cigar retailers who are not performing the activities I have mentioned above do not have to register or provide product listings to FDA. To conclude the tips section of this webinar, let me provide you with some resources, which I have also listed on this slide. First, here are some helpful links that you may wish to consult before contacting FDA. There is the guidance titled Extension of Certain Tobacco Product Compliance Deadlines Related to the Final Deeming Rule. We also have an FAQ document for FURLS and TRLM and a FURLS TRLM additional information page on our website. Also on our website is a page for manufacturers and a page explaining the Center's Office of Small Business Assistance. Finally, if you have questions regarding pre-market tobacco product applications, ingredient listings, or the requirements for health document submissions, you should contact CTP's Office of Science. If your question relates to CTP portal, e-submitter system, send those to ctpesub@fda.hhs.gov or askctp@fda.hhs.gov for all other questions.
Thanks, Lillian. So let's go ahead and move on to the enhancements to TRLM. So what have we done and what's in the works?
First, I want to mention that we've posted on our website a list of all the new features added to TRLM. An example of the enhancements you will find on our list include the ability to upload a single label and associate it with multiple product listings using the Associate Product Material Files menu option. You can use the same feature to upload a single consumer information file and associate the file with multiple product listings. Let me move to the scenario we talked about earlier where someone has to enter a large number of product listings into the system over an extended period of time. First, keep in mind that until you submit all the required product listing information in the system, your submission will stay in draft status in TRLM. You will not be able to access information that has remained in draft status after a certain length of time. In the past, the window for being in draft status was relatively short. However, with a recent enhancement, your registration and product listing may remain in draft status for 60 calendar days. Additionally, 10 days prior to your draft registration and product listing reaching the 60-day limit, the system will send you an email alerting you that your submission is approaching the draft threshold. If you need more time to enter the listing, a firm may request that a draft submission be extended by sending an email to CTP registration and listing at fda.hhs.gov. A firm's request for a draft extension must include an account ID number in the email request for a draft extension. However, please note that a granted request for a draft extension will not change the current compliance deadlines. TRLM has also been enhanced to allow decoupling. In the past, you needed to submit all required establishment registration information and all required advertising, labeling, and/or consumer information files to complete the product listing section in order to move from a draft status to completed. With the decoupling enhancement, you can now submit and update registration submissions to FDA and add or associate product material files such as advertising and labeling files to your establishment product listing at a later date. However, your product listing submission will remain in draft status until you complete the product listing section with all required product material files. For example, the required advertising and labeling information. To assist users, we have created some video tutorials on how to use TRLM. These videos cover topics such as accessing TRLM and creating a new account, registering a tobacco product establishment and associating product listings, updating existing product listings, uploading multiple materials or larger size material files, and how to associate advertising files to multiple products. You can find these tutorials at the link on this slide.
And can you tell us about any potential future enhancements?
We recognize your desire to print out copies of your submissions. Currently, the system does not allow for users to print out the entire listing that have been uploaded into TRLM. The only way for a user to print what has been submitted is using a computer print screen option, or copying and pasting product listings into a separate spreadsheet. One potential enhancement we're going to be looking into is to providing an application option to print reports from the TRLM system.
We recently issued a revised guidance on registration and product listing. And in that guidance, there was a section describing an FDA compliance policy with respect to the submission of product labeling. Now, since it's new, I think it would be helpful for you to walk us through that section of the guidance.
Sure. FDA recognizes that product listings for some tobacco products may result in numerous labeling submissions that the manufacturer must prepare and submit. For example, variations in package size, nicotine strength, propylene glycol, vegetable glycerine ratio, and flavors can result in substantial numbers of individual product labeling submissions. So to reduce the amount of labeling to upload, FDA does not at this time intend to enforce the requirement that owners and operators submit the labeling for each individual listed tobacco products when the registrant submits the information that represents the labeling for a selected line of products. So how will FDA determine if your submission falls within this compliance policy? Well, the guidance explains that FDA may consider whether the tobacco product's labeling is essentially identical. For example, the same formatting, fonts, colors, background text, and images, and whether the variations are limited to package size, nicotine strength, PG-VG ratio, and flavor. In the guidance, we've placed an example of how a registrant could submit information that represents the labeling for a selected line of products. I would encourage anyone who's required to submit a substantial amount of labeling to take a look at the guidance. You can direct questions regarding this compliance policy to CTP registration and listing at fda.hhs.gov. And be sure to include registration and listing labeling submissions in the subject line.
Thanks, Lillian. Before we close, I'd like to mention when we do make additional enhancements to the system, TRLM will send you an email notifying you about the enhancement if you provided us with an email on your account. However, you can also find a link to the list of TRLM enhancements posted on the login page of the system. And we provided you with that web page link earlier in this webinar. Well, That concludes today's webinar. I'd like to close by thanking all of you for your participation in today's broadcast, brought to you by the Center for Tobacco Products, protecting our kids and the nation's health from tobacco.